Good day, Mr. Joshua Aaron Pagulayan, as well as to you, my fellow classmates. I, Mary Joy Marang, together with Miss Elaine Privado, will be your presenter for today. So, the assigned topic to us is all about landscape identity. And through the discussion, we're going to provide you insights and in-depth understanding with regards to the landscape identity. So before we proceed to the discussion, let us now first know the learning objectives. At the end of the discussion, the student should be able to, first, exhibit in-depth understanding about the concept of landscape identity. Second, draw connections between landscapes and its people in determining landscape identities. Third, relate some landscapes that have experienced the loss of its landscape identity. Fourth, apply the concept of landscape identity in acknowledging the identity of a certain landscape. And lastly, explain the various aspects and identities included in landscape identities. So here are the table of contents. For part 1, it's all about introducing landscape identity. First, what is landscape? What is identity? What is landscape identity? Concept of landscape identity. Human being as contributor of landscape identities. And historical and future considerations in landscape identity. For the part 2, transactional model of landscape identity. First is the sphere of perception and the sphere of action. For the part 3, aspects of landscape identity. First, physical and spatial aspects. Second, social and cultural aspects. Third, two identifications as a guiding principles in the approach to landscape identity. For the part 4, landscape identity circle. A. Existential identity. B. Spatial identity. C. Personal identity. And letter D. Cultural identity. For the part 5, 4 identity relationships. First, personal existential. B. Cultural existential. C. Cultural spatial. And D. Personal spatial. And lastly, for part 6, 4 aspects conceptual framework. Letter A, physical aspects or personal spatial. Letter B, social aspects or cultural existential. Letter C, sensory aspects or personal existential. And letter D, memory aspects or cultural spatial. So let us now proceed to our part 1, which is about introducing landscape identity. So first, we have here a quote from Nikos Kazantzakis, and it says here that the landscape affects the human psyche, the soul, the body, and the innermost contemplations like music. Every time you feel nature deeper, you resonate better with her, finding new elements of balance and freedom. This quote means that the human interaction with his surroundings develops a connection between each other. It is said in the quote, the landscape affects the human psyche, which is the soul, the body, and the innermost contemplations, means that there is a great impact of the environment on the human beings, just like in their behavior, actions, and the way they think. In the line, every time you feel nature deeper, you resonate better with her. It impresses you that there's a deeper connection between you as a human being and your and landscape. So in understanding landscape identity, we should know first what landscape is. So it is the visible features of an area of land, its landforms, and how they integrate with natural or man-made features, are viewed as complex representations of continuous interactions between people and their surrounding environment, influenced by different factors in the process of the environment's evolutions. So, the landscape is the features of a certain area that we see and perceive, and we view a landscape depending on how we perceive it. Also, the landscape viewed as a complex representation of people interact continuously with each other and their surrounding environment. It is in the landscape where the interaction of people and their surrounding takes place, and it is influenced by various factors in the processes of the environment's evolution. What is identity? It is derived from the Latin word identitas, meaning sameness. It means that it is the qualities or features or characters that makes up a someone or something. It is the way we think about something as well as the way we viewed or define them. It is the condition of being same with something described. So let us now talk about what landscape identity is. It is came from the word landscape and identity. Landscape identity as the perceived uniqueness of a place makes the landscape of one place different from that of another. It is not fixed, but rather a dynamic process that evolves with time based on the human-environment relationships. As the relation between landscape and the identity of humans engaged with the landscape represents the formative role of landscape in building identity, both collective and individual, in response to the basic human need to belong. Meaning, landscape identity is the perceived uniqueness of a place and the landscape of a one place different from that another because of its own identity. It says that the identity of a landscape is not fixed but a dynamic process. Ibig sabihin, nagbabago ito base nga sa relationship na namamagitan sa human and the environment. And always keep in mind that the interaction between human and environment is continuously. Thus landscape identity is changed as well. The formative role of landscape is to build identity, both collective and individual, in response to the basic human need to belong. Landscape appearance at small-scale places such as city quarters or the street level to provide features that create a recognizable image of the place and its residents to differentiate from other places. Meaning, landscape identity creates recognizable image para ang isang place and its resident ay maiba o ma-differentiate sa iba pang places. For example niyan ay ang si human A and human B. So si human A siya ay taga Marinduque and si human B ay siya ay taga Maynila. So dito madi-differentiate mo na si human A at si human B, na si human A ay taga Marinduque and si human B ay taga Maynila. Kasi nga, doon sa landscape identity nila. Human being as a contributor of landscape identities. From the perspective of the users of the landscape, as people contribute to landscape identities from social and cultural perspectives, landscape identity has been seen to unite inhabitants and distinguish them from those from other areas by local residents. Lynch and Prohansky highlight the importance of interaction between people and the landscape, pointing out that the identity created through such interactions provides value to support people's lives. So, human beings serve as the contributor of landscape identities. Why? It is because people are the users of certain landscape and they contribute landscape identities through their social and cultural perspectives. And ang landscape identity, siya yung nag-unite sa inhabitants of a specific landscape which distinguish them from those other areas and people. Interaction between people and the landscape has important role, and that is create identity. Historical and future considerations in landscape identity. Landscape is also considered from the past to the future. historical and future considerations have also played an important role in defining landscape identity. This means that the historical and future considerations played an important role in defining the identity of a landscape. So, I have here an example showing a landscape identity. So, here we can see the Kasaryal at Buwak Marinduque. In the first picture, makikita natin dyan yung pinakang una niyang itsura. So, and then, in the second picture, we can see the new feature of the and characteristic of the landscape. And the last is the present. Yan yung kanyang kasulukuyang itsura sa ngayon. So this is the Kasaryal located at Buwak Marinduque. From before up until at present. Looking back at the old Kasaryal, it was used to be the official residence of the Gobernador Silio and Gobernador, that is the Spanish governor, who made annual visits when Marinduque was under the 18th to 19th century administration of Mindoro province. So dito, binasa dito yung historical na identity at historical consideration noong Kasaryal. Makikita 'di ba natin sa picture sa unang picture yung kanyang features and characteristic noong unang tayo nito. And then habang tumatagal ay nababago nga yung kanyang itsura, yung kanyang features, and at the same time ay yung identity niya ay nababago din. So kung tatanungin mo yung mga taong nakita or nakapunta na dyan sa Kasaryal, for example ay mga taong witness na nung picture, nung nasa unang picture, yan nung buhay naipanganak na sila nung nakatayo na yan, kung naabutan nila yung ganyang itsura ng Kasaryal. And kapag tinanong mo rin yung mga tao na witness or nakita nila yung ganong picture or itsura ng Kasaryal sa second picture, and kapag tinanong mo din yung mga tao ngayon na nakita ang Kasaryal, ang itsura ng Kasaryal ngayon, it is probably na magkaroon sila ng iba't ibang landscape identity when it comes doon sa Kasaryal. Kasi iba-iba yung kanilang pagbibigay ng identity ng Kasaryal. So, doon pumapasok yung from historical to its future na consideration. So, let us now proceed to Part 2, which is the transactional model of landscape identity. Mayroong tinatawag na transactional model of landscape identity, and it is underlining the importance of both physical landscape and people's perception. This mutual and dynamic interaction characterized by two levels, which are first, the sphere of perception. So what is the sphere of perception? It refers to the perceived character of a landscape as mentally constructed entity. So meaning it is the perceived character of a landscape na na-construct mentally ng isang tao or group of people. Kumbaga, ang landscape identity is built on the assumption that landscape is hindi lang basta-basta piniperceive ng isang individual, kundi siya mismo ang nagko-construct mentally nung identity of a landscape. Then the second one is sphere of action, which describes how the landscape and society interact with actions that might stimulate bonds between the people and their surroundings. Ito naman yung actions na nangyayari between human being and their surroundings, their interaction with action to each other. An example of this is taking action on landscape, such as making and implementing policies, planning, and management, as well as driving the change of the landscape and altering its character, meaning, and on how the resulting landscape shapes the bonds between people and place. Furthermore, these two spheres are considered as being dynamic and interdependent, based on the understanding that perception and action are two sides of the same coin that cannot be dissociated when approaching landscape identity in an integrated way. Meaning, sphere of perception and sphere of action ay hindi pwedeng maghiwalay because they are both important in approaching landscape identity, especially kapag yan ay in integrated way. Kumbaga ay you, hindi mo pwedeng gamitin lang ang sphere of perception when you are going to approach a landscape identity, or kaya naman ay sphere of action lang. Dapat gagamitin mo yung dalawang sphere kapag ikaw ay mag-a-approach ng isang landscape in integrated way. Part 3, aspects of landscape identity. So first, physical and spatial aspects. Gualtari and Mansvelt and Pedro Lee declared place identity to be the basic physical human interaction between people and the physical environment. The broad sense of the physical world includes both the physical properties of the settings and the involvements, memories, and symbolic meanings. So, ibig sabihin, the physical properties of the setting can be described, ito yung sinasabi dito na physical properties of setting, ito ay pwede ma-describe with at least some of our senses, like sight, hearing, touch, smell, and taste, and together with the involvements, memories, and symbolic, meaning these are all derived from human beings. Spatial characteristics have been divided into place identity and regional identity levels, with place identity referring to a smaller scale in the landscape, particularly to striking unique or historical objects that attract people's attention. So, ang halimbawa ng ng place identity ay yung mga church towers, farms, and rivers. Yun yung mga maliliit na scale lang ng isang landscape. On the other hand, regional identity refers to the larger scale in the landscape. At ito naman ay more attached siya sa geographical, natural, and cultural heritage. Ito yung malawakang scale naman pagdating sa isang landscape. Next is social and cultural aspects. A common definition of personal identity in landscape research field is the perception of an individual interacting with the physical characteristics of the place. Belk and Sack also describe it with embodied of phenomena related to the people in some kind of environment, such as roles people play in the place, the groups to which they belong, and the concrete places in their mind. Culture is important to the formation of landscape identity. Culture plays an indispensable role in the formation of local characteristics and identity. So, dito naman, it focused in the aspect of social and cultural. Kung sa papaano nagkakaroon ng interaction ang bawat isa, ang bawat tao, and yung mga role ng mga tao sa isang place kung saan sila naninirahan. And at the same time ay yung sa lugar na kanilang kinabibilangan. And also, yung cultural aspect ay siya ring ginagamit sa personal as a personal identity when yun nga kapag magtutukoy ka ng landscape identity. So according nga sa study ni Oakley, it is not enough to just walk in the streets and squares to learn about a place. Participating in the lives of the local residents is also necessary. Ibig sabihin, ang tao ay hindi ka lamang basta-basta lilibutin mo or maglalakad-lakad ka lang doon sa place na kinabibilangan mo, kundi uh, you should participate sa local residents kung saan ka kinabibilangan. Dapat ay marunong kang makipag-ugnayan sa kanila, makipag-interact sa kanila, at the same time ay makapag-participate sa lugar na kinabibilangan mo. A later study by Krauss focused on two sides of the landscape: the spatial and structural characteristics, as well as the cultural aesthetic expressions, both of which are relevant to the development of landscape identity. The landscape identity of a city includes not only the culture of the city but also its uniqueness in the regional environment. Specifically, the history of the city, including but not limited to its events and people, also influences and participates in shaping the identity of the city. Ibig sabihin ay ang spatial and structural characteristic as well as the cultural aesthetic expression ay parehong relevant sa development ng landscape identity.
So let us now proceed to the part 4, which is the landscape circle identity. So here's the landscape identity circle, which capture 4 identities. Those are existential identity, spatial identity, personal identity, and cultural identity. As you can see, theirs have arise with 4 quadrants, and I will discuss it from the next slide. So, the first is existential identity. It is more concerned with the physicality that people perceive in their local place. So, it means that they interact dynamically to influence both sides, the people and the landscape identity. The second is the spatial identity. It is based on the view that people identity landscape by their characteristic of forms, pattern, and elements, and it is more concerned with the way people identity associate with their environment. So for the example is the culture, the place image, the activity, and how it affects to the place. So the third is personal identity. It is more concerned with the feeling of the person on a particular place and their own. So it is usually refers to the properties to which we feel special sense of the attachment or ownership. So, kung saan tayo nagmula, kung sa isang lugar, doon tayo nag-attach. Kung ang hanap buhay man doon ay pagsasaka, so doon natin a-apply yung ating kaalaman sa isang lugar na yun kung saan tayo nagmula. So, the fourth is the cultural identity. It is all about the some kind of narrative that derive from people consensus of local landscape. So, for example of this is the race, gender, sexuality, ethnicity, nationality, and social class, and its physical abilities. Next slide. Part 5, 4 identity relationship. So, under the 4 identity relationship, we have 4 relationship under this. And the first is the personal existential. So, in this relationship, the personal meaning of a landscape lie in the association and the memories attached to the landscape. Such self-identity should continuously be confirmed and changed through the interaction between people and their social and the physical environment. So it means that the personal existential is focused on the sensory feeling that people have through their interaction with their surrounding and the environment. So, in this relationship, it is focused on our sensory feeling on the landscape identity. So, from the second is cultural existential. A place can help people the sense of mutual connection between themselves by means of envisioned images of a collective future, hence forming a community that shares similar interpersonal values. Through such processes, Plays are used by local population or celebratory, commemorative, or recreational activities creating a new culture in the community which is regarded as the important of their society characteristic. So, in cultural relationship, existential relationship, it emphasizes the reflection of the local culture and the historical factor. So, for example, here at Marinduque, we celebrate Moriones Festival held annually every Holy Week. So, this is one of the example of the cultural existential because it reflects in local culture and our history. So, yung pag-celebrate natin ng Moriones Festival every Holy Week is reflection that yung history natin dati is ina-adapt natin hanggang ngayon. So, the third is the cultural special. So, in this relationship, it focuses on the features that distinguish one region from another. In such a perspective, physical features can be observed by everyone, such as spatial composition, vegetation, and a wildlife. So, it focuses the meaning of the culture and the history embedded in people, the memory, and how such memory affects local environment through human interaction. So, one of my example is migration. So, when we are migrate in another place, so for example, when one family migrate in Manila. So, yung the culture and the language may also change because syempre pag lumipat ka sa isang lugar is maa-adapt mo yung kanilang language and culture, especially matagal kayo mag-i-stay sa isang lugar. Kunwari, nag-stay kayo doon na kayo nanirahan. So it have big possibility that the culture and the language of in that place were adapt not easily, but maybe in a past month, a few months, or half year, you will adapt it. So the last is the personal spatial relationship. Is such interaction emphasizes the importance of a landscape for an individual recognition and his means of orientation within it. Such identity relates to the features of the landscape, the physical appearance that can be observed by everyone, but which are not an equal importance to everyone. So it means that it reflects to the importance of the landscape physical appearance in providing people with their own meaning. So it means that how people interact with their environment with landscape identity. Let we proceed to the last part, which is the part 6, 4 aspect of conceptual framework. So the first aspect is the physical aspect or the personal spatial aspect. In all the relative identities, it is clear that physical aspect are a major aspect of landscape identity and acts as the major medium that reflects the personal spatial identity relationship. Next, physicality is the most basic to explore. Next is the term physical aspect is used to describe the surrounding geographical feature as well as other visible concrete embodiments in a local environment, such as the way the place is formed as well as the style or of architecture. Last is it acts as the medium through which people interact with the surrounding environment. Physical aspect mainly consists of the architectural environment and the landscape environment. So, for the example, this includes housing types and the settlements, like rural places, like province. Some houses were built far apart from each other or dispersed, And other houses were built making a villages. So the second aspect is the social aspect or a cultural existential. Um, the significance of social activities in the process of identification and the evaluation of the community's identities was demonstrated by Tafil in 1978, whose study developed the idea that social aspects of landscape identity are the synthesis of certain associations in people's daily lives. The second is the cultural essential identities relationship focuses on how people contribute to the environment to make it more attractive and distinguishable to the outside world. So, the some extent it is because of the specific interrelationship between people and place that a place is given a unique identity. The last is, namely, when social activities take place in the landscape, our unique identity is also formed. So, for example, for example, is a festival. The Mariones Festival here in Marinduque, which held annually on Holy Week. This was the culture of Marinduque, and it reflects the culture and the relationship with people and their environment. The third is the sensory aspect, or a personal existential. An individual identities the landscape within the site as special largely because some events or experiences recorded in their biography are related to the place. The personal existential relationship is reflected through such sensory aspect. The next is the connection with the place can serve as the significant to the sense landscape, as the inhabitants of the landscape are essential. The personal existential relationship plays a major in the sense of people get from where they dwell. Um, Last is hence sensory aspect focus on the way people identify the place. People's immediate sensory perception of the place in those with certain identity. It means that feelings about daily life and the surrounding environment contribute to the formation of this relationship, which is all about the ability to provide psychological comfort of people to their environment. So the last aspect is the memory aspect or a cultural spatial. The cultural spatial relationship focuses on the uniqueness of a cultural meaning that derive from people daily lives. So one of the easiest way to determine the uniqueness of the community in history is to examine their culture. And the term culture is largely embedded into the form by people memory. It has been cast into autobiographical memories and social biographical memories, and where the former is based on the perspective of individual observed while the latter is based on the conceptual social narrative. In memory aspect, it means that a community living in a particular area for a long period of time, generation, leaves considerable heritage, which includes tangible heritage such as historical relics and the monuments, as well as the intangible heritage such as the spirit and the history. However, both spiritual and the material aspect are fragments, and the reflection of the local history which is deeply intertwined with the influences of the local history which with the local history um, and influence the local people memories. Um, for individual, they since they can observe the learn when we are in pre-birth history from social memories, the interactive relationship between people and their local environments can be developed from shared memories. Hence, for the local culture can be formed. That's all.
So that's the end of our discussion about landscape identity. I hope you learned something from us, and at the same time you acquired knowledge or insights with regards to landscape identity. God bless us all and thank you for watching our presentation.